So yeah, John Cykerbike was currently with Seal Storage. I was originally going to try to advocate for being able to batch the retrieval of post data and whatnot. But on the first afternoon here, I found out Magic was already reading my mind, and it's in progress right now. So we'll move on from that. The other thing that I want to talk about, or that is second near and dear to me, second place near and dear to me, and participating in this conference for the past week and listening to the product market fit discussions. So many of those things sound like layer 2 type problems and applications and whatnot, and fundamentally don't tie back to adding value to the Filecoin sealed sectors and whatnot. And again, I want to emphasize that the sealed sector itself is something for us and our network. It's not so much for the customer. It happens to have a side effect of immutability and proof of immutability and all that stuff, but it's not something that we can directly sell. And as a consequence of that, we're trying to compete on archive where we have 2 sealed replicas and at least 1 hot copy. That means we've got 3 times the footprint of many of the people that we're trying to compete against, like a Backblaze or whatnot. So there's some serious problems there. So and there were a couple of very high profile use cases that crossed my radar over the past year or so. One of them was Starling Labs, the folks that are collecting all of the war crime data and whatnot, and the fact that they had to essentially disconnect from any form of retrieval, any form of IPFS, because they couldn't manage access controls. And they didn't want anybody siphoning data off of their storage archives that could possibly be used by a bad actor in a state to go after the journalists that reported it. That started a bunch of discussions about access controls. And after 6 months in the DSA, I think we pretty much proved we can do no better in terms of access controls than the conventional S3 APIs where we have public and private keys and a couple of other things. All that does essentially is open and close a gate. It does not grant any property rights or any ownership. The other thing that really struck me is what happened with the New York Times and ChatGPT. ChatGPT had to subpoena like 150 ISPs and triangulate forensic data to figure out and prove in court that ChatGPT was scraping their websites and using their content without permission. And then finally, some of the CDN type things, as we move forward, there was a great app that was presented in Utah just a couple weeks ago, being able to monetize one's content in CDN platforms, like an alternative backend for Rumble or Spotify or a YouTube-like thing. Again, Filecoin has no intrinsic controls for this and no way to establish algorithms that can do that. So I'm going to lay out just a couple of top-level things. I don't know how to do what I want to do. And more than anything else, I want to plant seeds in this room. And I want you guys to look at a couple of the ideas I'm pitching out here and let your bullshit detectors get fired off and prove that we can't do it this way, or there's something completely overlooked. But as a consumer of Filecoin storage, I want complete control over who can access my data. And again, if we look at all the product market fit things, probably 90% of them require some kind of gated access controls. We are not going to get a HEPA sticker on the outside the box without something that is at least as good or better than what Web 2 can do now. And Web 2 can't do it very well. And that comes down to a decision, either unconditionally grant, the way IPFS works today, unconditionally deny, what Starling Labs did by disconnecting their network cables, or a decision grant or deny or monetize or whatnot based on the results of a smart contract or Lambda function call. And I also want to be able to maintain accurate accounting of who accesses my data. Even if I say always grant, I want the option to be able to record this stuff so that I don't have to do like what the New York Times did and subpoena 150 SPs and have legions of IT guys pouring through that data. And the other thing I want to do is I want to add value to the notion of the sealed sector. We've got this concept that has all these attributes, it's immutable, and what goes into that sealed sector is never going to be able to change and come up with the same CID. So I want one more piece of information in there that allows me to assert ownership rights or property rights over the data that's in there. When I was younger, before the patent office changed the rules, the patent lawyers would say, well, if you can't afford an attorney on this bright idea you have, write it down on a couple of pieces of paper, put it in an envelope, and then mail it to yourself. Don't open it. But 10 years from now, you'll be able to prove in a court of law that you had that idea 10 years ago because there's a postmark on it, right? So what if we found a way to do the same thing with a 32 gig CID that ends up on chain that can prove, I'm a barfly musician, the Billy Joel of the 1970s. I come up with an interesting riff. I upload it to Filecoin, and somewhere in that data, in that thing, is half of a crypto puzzle that only I can solve. I can prove it when on chain. I can prove the resultant CID, and I can prove that I can answer a challenge to that cryptographically sealed sector 10 years from now when Taylor Swift or somebody rips it off and tries to use it without compensation or attribution. I have proof that I was the originator of that thing on this particular date. What I'm asking for is, what's out of scope is we're not going to be able to do access controls any better than Web 2. And I also don't want to look at multi-key decryption options or encryption in general as a way to prove custody or control access. Again, that we can't do that any better than any Web 2 service. And in terms of giving the end user a warm fuzzy, the promise of security through encryption, it all comes down to a question of time for how far behind quantum technology is in terms of decrypting it. And so, let me figure out how to, whoop. I'm going, there we are. So let me throw a couple options out and we'll go into them. So as I look at this, one option is to embed some kind of signed message digest, particularly in a CAR-V2 format where we've got this really neat index that's completely unused at the end of the CAR file. If we allocate or come up with a schema so that we can come up with a cryptographically signed message digest that is embedded and referenced from the index at the end of a CAR-V2 file, and we pivot from doing sealing CAR-V1 files to CAR-V2, we can encapsulate a message digest that represents the signature of all the rest of the data that's in the sealed sector in such a way that only the message digest could only be authenticated by the originator of that data. Another one, so that's a real simple use thing that we could do. On the opposite end, we could rewire the circuits that are actually accomplishing the PC1, PC2, C1, C2, and whatnot, and go from the three inputs today, which is the DRAN signal or DRAN value, SP metadata, and the data in the clear itself. Those are the three ingredients we have today. If we could add the fourth, that is the crypto identity of the originating source, we can solve it there. That's a heavy, heavy lift. And I can't speak to that, but I throw it out there as one extreme, we just can adopt a convention on the CAR files. The other extreme, we rewire the sealing pipeline to incorporate a fourth data element in there. And then another option is to simply use NFT technologies. Go ahead.
That then limits you to owning a full 32 gigabyte sector though.
What's that?
That would then, modifying the circuit would limit you to owning the 32 gigabyte sector and therefore, no? But if the file's 2K, you have to own the whole 32 gigabytes for a 2K file inside, and it would mean your 2K deal is actually paying for a full 32 gigabyte deal.
However, I can have, in the case of modifying or leveraging CAR-V2 formats, I can have multiple index message digests for spans within which is the original purpose of the index, was to map spans within the encapsulated V1 file that is in the 32 gig sector.
I don't disagree with the CAR-V2. I think that one's probably the better option. But I think for modifying sealing, that's not going to work for
Well, we're not going to rewrite super seal. I only put it out there as on the complexity matrix. That's way the hell on the other side of the horizon.
Yeah. I just think the 32 gigabyte or 64 gigabyte sector issue that Filecoin has makes that one more impractical as well on top of that.
And then somewhere that kind of leverages the existing conventions is everything that's been developed for NFTs. So we have quite a few orgs and business flows that store NFTs as CIDs, and the problem with that. I'll get to that. And I pointed at ERC 1155 for a bunch of reasons. That seems to be the latest incarnation, but it is able to bring together fungible and non-fungible tokens. And that's really empowering. So moving ahead, this kind of illustrates what we've got going on here for a CAR V2. Again, there's a CAR V1 that's embedded in the middle of this. At the end of the CAR V2 file, there is an arbitrary list of indexed offsets. There isn't a schema yet that deliberately maps it onto something that is universally decodable. We could adopt that. And one of the payloads in that optional padding area could be a message digest that only the content originator could authenticate against and prove that he had that identity. So that's one scheme. And this is the super complicated one. This is picking a entry point into the sealing pipeline with which to inject this other cryptographic key in addition to the miner ID and the DRAND and the data in the clear. That's a heavy lift, but I just share it with the group as something I was thinking about. And then finally, there is the idea of leveraging the ERC multi-token standards, if you will. And there's been a progression since ERC 20. There's been 3, each of them building on one another. Now, the problem with all this stuff, if I use Filecoin to store the CID, there is no established way to go from that CID to the NFT that represents the property rights of the content holder. It's a one-way relationship. It's not bidirectional link, so I can't go from one and get the other, and that presents quite a problem. But I think that if we were to treat the sealed sector as the non-fungible token and the something in fill or the miner ID or something like that as the fungible token, we can come up with a bidirectional mapping there that works both ways, that can prove that the one is associated with the other and the other can link back cryptographically to the other half. Any thoughts or opinions on how we can, and again, this all comes down to once we have a means and mechanism to uniquely identify the originator, cryptographically uniquely identify the originator, we can enable things like smart contracts, just the way we can execute smart contracts against NFTs today, in such a way that we can gate the access on the result of a smart contract function or a Lambda function. And as a minimum, let's suppose somebody wants to retrieve a piece of data, we send that back to the originator and he signs a message that either says yes or no. He may be optionally log it, or he may set a condition to always grant or always deny. But I think fundamentally this is a much better schema than trying to emulate ACLs on conventional Web 2 technologies.
Have you seen UCANs?
What?
Have you seen UCANs?
I have not.
Okay. UCANs provide a protocol for like authorized delegation. And so you can give like a service provider a token to then do the thing on your behalf and that kind of thing. And with some levels of access control, which I think may solve most of the problems you're facing, but maybe not all of them. So how inbuilt it is probably the thing that's the thing to really solve. And
would UCAN then form the gate mechanism that either it makes the go no-go decision on a retrieval request? And if so, what data, how do I make that gate function the prerogative of the originator ID?
So you can essentially think of UCANs as this. It is sort of a JWT token, but with the added twist of you can create a UCAN which then gives the holder of the token the right to mint a subtoken with a subset of claims. And so you can like recursively create like subtokens that have like some limited rights. And then I believe there is some mechanism for like revoking access to subtokens.
So
And,
can you give me a list of the dependent and independent variables that go into making a UCAN scheme work? How do I, if this is, again, excuse my ignorance, what are the pieces that we're putting on the table here in trying to leverage UCAN? What are the inputs and how do I derive the outputs?
Like UCANs, they are something that we want to add to retrievals for ACLs. At least we'll need them for PDP, but PDP is the same.
Say that again, please.
We'll need UCANs at least for PDP, for like Sriracha, for example, to manage access to data. But like, okay, we're doing it anyway, so we might as well add them to normal retrievals. So like essentially that should mean that I, as a client, when you make a deal, I can say I want to manage this deal from like this like UCAN token, let's say, and then I, the client, can later come and either give someone a subtoken that lets them retrieve some subset of data for some time, or some other like revocation.
So this token that we're talking about, is that what ends up in the CID, or where does this live?
No, it is entirely off chain. It's off chain.
So this is
like the
if I have a provider ID and I have a CID, and they happen to have their data available with IPFS or something like that, how would UCAN prevent unauthorized access?
So it's something that will be in Curio. So if you have a deal which is marked as like it has ACL, if you try to retrieve it with BitSwap, it will, probably be flagged as no BitSwap because you want ACLs. And then if you try to retrieve it with HTTP and you do not provide the authorization token, the request will be just rejected.
When you said authorization token, that smells a lot like Web2 authentication procedures.
I mean, it is that, but the token is more fancy, like Web3 thing where you can delegate permissions to clients of chain and give them the thing. Like it's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, to revisit the use cases as a sieve to filter this, let's suppose I come up with an open platform that is complementary to what Spotify does. I'm an independent music artist, and I'm going to subcontract something that can charge micropayment revenue for plays on my song. And it should be my prerogative as to whether or not I want to give it away for free. Or let's suppose I own the Beatles catalog, I'm going to monetize the shit out of it.
Yeah, I mean, so what we can do is, for example, so here's the thing, like with UCAN, we can add like some additional verification steps. So we can have this verification step which says this token is valid only if it the request also contains a signature that if I put it into this smart contract, the smart contract says it's okay. And now I can build like a wrapper on an NFT and say, you can retrieve this data only if you're authorized by this NFT. So that's how we could do it.
And can I handle the situation where I've got 10,000 paying subscribers and 100,000 knocking at the door, but only the 10,000 get access?
Well, you can then go based on like, if you're the owner, you get it for free. If you're not the owner, you can still get it, but send me whatever token it is that you're using for payment, right? It gives you like some form of identity.
And can I use this framework to generate triggers that, say, in the always grant circumstance, I always give it to somebody who, kind of a KYC, KYB type thing. I will give it to anybody who I can prove they say who they are so that I can make a record of it on a separate bit of infrastructure.
Yeah, and honestly, like now that I think about it, this might even be possible to integrate with I mean, as much as people hate it with WebDRM in some way,
Okay.
which, it would be much easier to sell in some cases. And, it's like a feature that's like not very Web3 friendly, but it exists. And if there are people who would want to use it, then I feel this would be decent.
So we have leveraging UCAN as a hook into live PDP and or Curio's implementation of it that would gate and control access and provide event hooks for making ledgered recordings of it. Does anybody else have any other ideas that we could throw up there?
I guess I'm just curious for the UCAN implementation, would that still make it so that you're dependent on Storacha or an L2? No.
And that's something that's really important to me as we move into these deal-making front-end storefronts. This pass-through mechanism that maintains originator ID has to be able to survive that munging and distribution that goes through the deal-making storefronts. So it has to, right now, everything that comes through, say, a CID, a Gravity, or a Storacha, or Agave thing, eventually, I don't care what storefront I come through. I care about the guy on the other end that initiated the deal and preserving his property rights as it goes on to Filecoin.
And we've been talking a little bit in the DSA around different ways of providing access control. I guess I'm just curious, compared to that first option of actually including a signature in a car file, how do UCANs hold up against that?
In my head, it's where it goes.
Okay. This part of the same.
It's just the tool that gives you all the elements like the delegation.
And remind me again, in the context of a UCAN implementation, where is the cryptographic identity of the originator ID? Where is that going to be stored?
The copy to would be in my information for it.
It'd be what?
If you wanted it in the file.
I want it to be, I don't want, let's suppose I go into a mode where I've got one cryptographic replica and I have two copies in the clear and two different data regions. If I lose the sealed copy, I should be able to recreate it given the originator ID. I should end up with the same binary signature, same CID on the top in recreating that at any other later point in time. At the same time, if I lose the two copies in the clear, but I can reconstruct their ingredients either and add back in the cryptographic ID of the originator, I should be able to derive and recreate the same CID.
The way I am thinking about it is that if we leave it to like who you make the deal with, I guess is what you're suggesting, Magic, where it's like on the SP or whoever it is to do the ACL and all of this. The issue I see is that if they lose their metadata at any point, your ACL association gets lost. So having it based in file then allows at least it to be regenerate. Like you can then figure out who can or should have access. I think it's sort of like the multi-format self-describing.
It's what?
The multi-format self-describing problem of like, how do you, if you come across the hard drive in 100 years, can you actually like figure out what the hell it is and who owns it and who's the originator of it? So putting it into the car file in my head is the way you would go about it.
It has to be, if we don't do that, then we don't add value to the sealed sector. And in terms of marketing and promotion of our technology, being able to take that sealed sector, we've been touting it as immutable, blah, 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 and proven all that kind of stuff. But if at the same time, we're able to leverage these cryptographic techniques to prove that cryptographic replica is not reproducible without the original content creator's ID, authorization, signed message, whatever, then we still haven't added value to that sealed sector. So when it comes time to pitch this against conventional Web 2 technologies, one of the benefits I want to put on the spec sheet is the enablement of digital, cryptographically secured digital property rights for things that land on Filecoin. Even if the business logic runs against the thing in the clear, I want to add compound value to that sealed sector that ends up on chain. Is there any other ideas in the room, that anything that we're overlooking? So we've kind of been swirling around the idea of UCAN, and I want to deep dive with you guys at the first possible opportunity and sketch this out. But I don't want to leave anybody's speculation off the table.
Yeah, I would suggest to take a look at how this set of problems were solved by others.
I don't know
for
of
example,
anybody that's granting
So
property
take a look
rights.
at, for example, Ocean Protocol. It's been for like 3-4 different versions, and before 1155, the problem like that 1155 can solve for the use case at hand
What
was
the name
already
of that?
solved by Ocean Protocol like 4 or 5 years ago. We did the metadata, kind of added. Imagine like NFT can have a key value store. Right?
Mhm.
Before that, I never seen NFT in the storage that you can design any kind, right? So these were some of the things, and they were done specifically to allow that individual pieces of data to represent property rights, and that property rights to be usable, transferable, composable, meaning you can things like we explore things using this IP as collateral to mint a stable coin in MakerDAO. Right?
Okay.
So that's what, but that's like 5 years work. Let's learn from that.
Let's lock in and swap contact info. And I would like to come up with a proposal for the DSA and all the other vested parties. This needs to be a community solution. We need to be able to interact and interop across whatever we come up with, and it has to be doable. But as we go through and look at this product market fit stuff, it's all neat and interesting, but without something like this, 90% of it is all utopian pipe dreams. And I probably shouldn't say that, but that's as I reflect on this, I think this idea of digital property rights enablement is the key underpinning to adding more value to the sealed sector above and beyond our own internal needs, and enabling all these L2 type applications to actually control access, to monetize, to build CDN networks, all this other stuff. Without we know ACLs won't work. Let's get something else going and try to. I would like to come up with a FIPS in about 2 weeks, if that's at all possible. So with that, I'm all done, unless there's any other questions.
Great. Thank you,
Alrighty.
John.